The Galactic Empire's capital glittered in the void like a crown jewel, its orbit swarmed by warships and commerce vessels alike. Beneath its shimmering domes and spires lay the council chamber, an imposing amphitheater where the galaxy's most powerful beings convened to decide the fates of entire civilizations. Today, the chamber buzzed with anticipation, every delegate present to witness the Empire's ultimatum to humanity. The air crackled with tension as the Emperor, a towering figure draped in crimson and gold, rose from his throne. His voice, amplified by unseen technology, reverberated through the chamber. "Humans," he began, his tone steeped in authority, "you have defied our commands, expanded beyond your allotted sectors, and refused the tributes demanded by imperial decree. This insolence cannot stand. Submit to the Empire's rule, or face annihilation." From the central podium, the human delegation stood unyielding. Their leader, Ambassador Elena Vasquez, was a woman of calm strength, her sharp eyes scanning the assembly. She wore a simple black uniform adorned with the emblem of Earth's United Coalition, a stark contrast to the elaborate attire of the Imperial Council. "We understand your concerns," Elena said, her voice steady but carrying an undertone of steel. "However, humanity does not bow to conquerors. We seek coexistence, not submission." The chamber erupted into murmurs and jeers. A reptilian delegate hissed, its claws tapping against the marble floor. A massive avian counselor ruffled its feathers in contempt. The Emperor raised a hand, silencing the room. "You misunderstand your position," he said, his golden eyes narrowing. "The Empire has endured for millennia. Our fleets are vast, our armies unmatched. What hope does your fledgling species have against us?" Elena allowed the question to hang in the air, her expression unchanging. "A war with humanity would not be like your previous conquests," she said, her words deliberate. "But before you make your decision, allow us to show you why." Beside her, Commander Darius Kane activated a small device, projecting a holographic display into the center of the chamber. The image was a live feed from Earth, a view of its vibrant blue oceans, sprawling cities, and bustling spaceports. "This is our home," Darius said, his deep voice commanding attention. "A world of beauty and innovation, but also one forged in fire." The Emperor leaned forward, his curiosity piqued despite himself. "What are you implying?" "That humanity's history is written in blood," Elena replied. "You see us as weak because we value peace, but that peace was hard-earned. We are the heirs of centuries of war, suffering, and survival. If you truly wish to understand the consequences of waging war against us, we must show you who we are." The council exchanged skeptical glances, but the Emperor waved them to silence. "You have one chance, Ambassador. Speak." Elena nodded to Darius, who adjusted the hologram. The serene image of Earth shifted to scenes of devastation. Ancient battlefields strewn with corpses, cities reduced to rubble, and mushroom clouds rising ominously into the sky. Gasps rippled through the chamber. Even the most hardened imperial generals shifted uncomfortably in their seats. "These are glimpses of our past," Elena said, her voice tinged with solemnity. "Humanity has waged war on itself since the dawn of our existence. From crude weapons to technologies that could destroy entire planets, we've mastered the art of destruction. Not because we desired it, but because necessity demanded it." A member of the council, a feline-like alien with emerald fur, leaned forward. "Why would you show us this? It only proves your savagery." "Because it's not just about what we've done," Elena replied, meeting the counselor's gaze. "It's about what we've learned. Each war has left scars, but it has also taught us the cost of arrogance and the value of restraint." Darius stepped forward, his voice like gravel. "You call yourselves an empire, but have you ever fought an enemy who would rather burn their world than surrender? Have you faced a species that turns its greatest tragedies into its most profound strengths? If you push us to war, you will learn what it means to fight humans." The chamber fell in a stunned silence. Even the Emperor seemed momentarily lost for words. When he finally spoke, his tone was measured, almost contemplative. "You claim to value peace. yet you threaten us with war. How do we know this isn't a bluff? It's not a threat, Elena said softly. It's a truth. Humanity does not seek conflict, but we will not shy away from it if forced. The choice is yours, Your Majesty. We can share knowledge and prosperity, or we can share the horrors of war. The emperor reclined in his throne, his expression unreadable. Around the chamber, the murmurs resumed, quieter this time, laden with uncertainty. Elena and Darius stood firm, their eyes unwavering, as if daring the empire to test their resolve. For a moment, it seemed as if the emperor might deliver his verdict then and there. Instead, he rose and gestured to his advisors. We will deliberate. Return tomorrow for our decision. The human delegation inclined their heads and turned to leave, their footsteps echoing through the chamber. As the doors closed behind them, Elena glanced at Darius. Do you think they'll listen? Darius shrugged. If they're wise, they will. But wisdom isn't always abundant in rulers drunk on power. Elena sighed, her gaze distant. Then we'd better prepare for the alternative. Outside, the empire's capital gleamed under 1,000 artificial suns, a monument to its supremacy. Yet within its heart, seeds of doubt had been sown. And as the human delegation returned to their quarters, they carried with them the weight of their people's history, and the hope that it would be enough to avert catastrophe. The council chamber felt heavier than next day, as if the air itself had absorbed the weight of yesterday's revelations. The human delegation stood in the center of the amphitheater, their postures unwavering, while the imperial council sat in their tiered seats, their expressions unreadable. The emperor was seated high above them all, his golden robes catching the soft glow of the chamber's lights. When he raised his hand, silence descended like a shroud. You spoke boldly yesterday, Ambassador Vasquez, the emperor began, his voice a measured rumble. Yet bold words do not sway an empire. We are here today to hear your answer. Will humanity kneel before the empire, or must we take what we desire by force? Elena Vasquez met the emperor's gaze with steady resolve, her expression calm but unyielding. Her presence was magnetic, her voice clear as she replied, We have no intention of kneeling. But we are not here to provoke war. We are here to offer a different path, one that benefits us all. Across the chamber, General Theris, one of the Empire's most decorated military leaders, leaned forward. His silver-plated armor glinted in the light, and his scaled face twisted into a sneer. Enough of this posturing, he said, his voice sharp and filled with disdain. We've seen what humans are, a fractured, barbaric species clinging to the edges of the galaxy. Your history of war is nothing more than evidence of your savagery. You expect us to believe you've changed? Elena didn't flinch. We're not asking you to believe anything, she said. We're asking you to understand. The wars you saw in our presentation were born from chaos and ignorance, but they taught us lessons no civilization should have to learn. You see us as fractured because we refuse to be ruled by a single power. You see us as barbaric because we refuse to wage war without cause. If you mistake that for weakness, General, you're making a grave error. The room erupted into murmurs, some council members nodding in agreement, others whispering their doubts. General Theris slammed his clawed hand against the armrest of his seat. Arrogance, that's all I hear. Your kind should be crushed before you spread your disorder across the galaxy. From beside Elena, Commander Darius Kane's eyes narrowed, his jaw tightening. He was a man who had seen the worst of humanity's conflicts, and his patience for the Empire's condescension was wearing thin. General, he said, his voice low but resonant, you're quick to call us disorderly. Yet you sit here, leading an empire built on conquest and subjugation. You believe your strength makes you superior. Tell me, how often has that belief been tested by an equal opponent? Theris's scales darkened, his anger barely contained, but the Emperor raised a hand to silence him. Enough, he said, his tone cold. His eyes shifted back to Elena. You speak of lessons learned, of restraint. Yet your history is steeped in war. How can we trust a species that has only ever known conflict? Elena hesitated for a moment, choosing her words carefully. Trust is earned, not given, she said. We can't erase our past, but we can show you what we've become. Humanity is not the same species that once tore itself apart. We've unified in ways once thought impossible. We've learned the value of diplomacy, cooperation, and coexistence. We came here to avoid war, not to justify it. The Emperor's gaze lingered on her, weighing her words. His silence was unnerving, a palpable force in the room. Around him, the council members exchanged uneasy glances. Some seemed moved, others skeptical, but none dared interrupt. Finally, the Emperor spoke again, his tone sharp. If we choose war, what then? You've made it clear you won't surrender. Will you burn your worlds, as you claim your ancestors once did? Will you drag the galaxy into chaos to prove a point? Darius stepped forward, his voice cutting through the tension. If you force war upon us, we will fight, and we'll do so with everything we have. But understand this. If that day comes, it won't be because humanity desired it. It will be because the Empire chose to underestimate us. His words hung in the air, and for a moment, no one spoke. The Emperor leaned back in his throne, his expression inscrutable. Elena could feel the weight of the moment pressing down on her, but she held her ground. She knew they were walking a razor's edge, each word potentially tipping the balance. You paint yourselves as survivors, the Emperor said at last. But survival alone does not make a civilization worthy of respect. Tell me, Ambassador, why should the Empire tolerate your existence? What do you offer us that we cannot simply take? Elena drew a deep breath, her mind racing. She knew this question was the crux of their argument, the moment that would determine whether the Empire saw humanity as an ally or a threat. We offer perspective, she said finally, strength tempered by compassion, innovation driven by necessity, resilience born of hardship. These are qualities no empire can simply take. They must be earned. Together, we can create something greater than conquest alone can achieve. The Emperor's golden eyes narrowed, and for a brief instant, Elena thought she saw a flicker of doubt. You presume much, he said, his voice softer now, almost contemplative. But presumption is not the same as arrogance. We will deliberate on your words, Ambassador. Return tomorrow for our answer. The chamber's lights dimmed slightly as the Emperor rose, signaling the end of the session. Elena and Darius bowed slightly before turning to leave, their footsteps echoing through the vast hall. The murmurs of the council followed them, a cacophony of uncertainty and intrigue. As they stepped into the corridor, Darius exhaled sharply, his tension evident. They're stalling, he muttered, trying to decide if it's worth the risk. Elena glanced at him, her expression unreadable. They're deciding if they believe us, she said. And if they don't, we need to be ready. Outside the chamber, the city stretched endlessly, its beauty masking the undercurrents of impending conflict. The delegation moved through its streets in silence, the weight of the Empire's ultimatum pressing heavily on their shoulders. As they reached their quarters, Elena paused, her gaze fixed on the horizon. She didn't say a word, but her silence spoke volumes. The battle for humanity's survival had already begun, and it was being fought not with weapons, but with words. The Imperial Council convened again under the same gleaming dome, but this time, the tension in the air was palpable. The human delegation stood in silence as the Emperor motioned for them to proceed. Elena Vasquez exchanged a brief glance with Commander Darius Kane, her silent question mirrored in his grim expression. They had prepared for this moment, but the stakes were higher than ever. The Empire's patience was thin, and their audience skeptical. Elena stepped forward, her composure flawless despite the gravity of the situation. She activated a small device in her hand, and the room dimmed as a holographic projection blossomed to life in the center of the chamber. The serene image of Earth appeared once again, spinning gently in the void. This is where it began, Elena said, her voice carrying over the silent assembly. A single planet, rich in life but fraught with conflict. To understand us, you must understand what shaped us. The image shifted, zooming in on an ancient battlefield. Primitive warriors clashed with crude weapons, their faces twisted with fear and rage. The sounds of battle echoed through the chamber. The clang of metal, the cries of the wounded, the roar of defiance. These were our earliest wars, Elena continued. Tribes fighting for survival, for land, for resources. It was brutal, senseless, and yet it was the foundation of our growth. A reptilian counselor clicked their tongue in disdain. This is nothing more than savagery, they said. What lesson do you expect us to draw from this? Elena met the counselor's gaze without flinching. That even in chaos, there is evolution. From these struggles, we learned organization, strategy, and the importance of unity. But we also learned the cost of division. The hologram transitioned to the rise of ancient empires. Legions marching in perfect formation, massive fortresses under siege, and fleets of wooden ships battling on vast oceans. As our civilizations grew, so did our wars. We fought over borders, ideologies, and ambitions. Each conflict left scars, but also progress. We built nations, created laws, and began to understand the importance of cooperation, though often too late. Commander Kane stepped forward, his voice low but resonant. We're not here to glorify our wars. We're here to show you their consequences. He gestured to the projection as it shifted to scenes of ruin. Cities burned to ash, fields littered with the dead, and survivors huddled in the shadows of destruction. Every victory came with a cost. Every empire that rose eventually fell. And yet, we endured. The council watched in silence, their initial skepticism giving way to a reluctant curiosity. The hologram advanced to more recent history, showing the Industrial Revolution and its transformation of warfare. Cannons roared, railroads transported armies, and machines of war rolled across battlefields. With every new technology, the scale of our conflicts grew, Elena said. We learned to harness the elements, to bend steel to our will, to create weapons of unimaginable power. But we also began to see the limits of war's utility. The projection froze on an image of a World War I trench, soldiers knee-deep in mud, their faces etched with despair. This was the Great War, Elena said, her voice softer now. Millions died for inches of ground. Poison gas choked the air. Humanity realized, for the first time, the true horror of industrialized warfare. One of the counselors, a crystalline being whose voice rang like chimes, spoke hesitantly. And yet, you fought again. Why? Because we didn't learn fast enough, Elena replied, her tone unflinching. The hologram shifted to World War II, aerial bombings, amphibious landings, and the detonation of nuclear weapons. This was the most devastating conflict in our history. Entire cities were annihilated. Genocide wiped out millions. And in the end, we created a weapon so powerful it could destroy our entire species. A gasp rippled through the chamber as the projection showed the mushroom cloud rising over Hiroshima. Even the Emperor's composure wavered as he leaned forward, his golden eyes narrowing. You used this weapon on yourselves? Elena's expression hardened. We did. It ended the war, but at an unimaginable cost. And it left us with a terrible understanding. If we continued down this path, we would not survive another war. The room was silent, the weight of her words sinking in. Darius took a step forward, his voice cutting through the stillness. That was the moment we began to change. The Cold War that followed wasn't fought with weapons, but with the threat of them. We learned to avoid direct conflict because we understood the consequences too well. We began to value diplomacy, to seek solutions that didn't end in bloodshed. The hologram displayed images of peace treaties, international alliances, and humanitarian efforts. These lessons came at a high price, Elena said, but they shaped us into what we are today, a species that understands the cost of war and values the fragility of peace. The Emperor leaned back in his throne, his expression unreadable. Around him, the counselors exchanged uncertain glances. Some seemed moved, others skeptical, but none spoke. Elena stepped back, allowing the silence to stretch. She wanted them to feel the weight of what they had just seen, to understand that humanity's history was both a warning and a promise. Finally, the Emperor spoke, his voice measured. You have shown us much, Ambassador. But understanding does not erase doubt. What guarantee do we have that your species will not revert to its old ways? That your thirst for survival will not drive you to aggression? Elena met his gaze, her voice steady. There are no guarantees. But if you choose war with humanity, you will not face a fractured species fighting for survival. You will face a united one fighting for its future. And we will not be the ones to burn first. The Emperor's eyes narrowed, but he said nothing more. He gestured for the delegation to step back, signaling the end of their presentation. As they left the chamber, the tension in the air remained, a silent reminder of the decision yet to come. Outside, the sky above the imperial capital was a swirling tapestry of stars and ships, a reminder of the Empire's vast power. Yet for the first time, that power felt fragile, vulnerable to the weight of a history they had only begun to comprehend. Elena and Darius walked in silence, the echoes of humanity's past following them like shadows. The future hung in the balance, and they could only hope their message had been enough. The human delegation's quarters were quiet, the silence punctuated only by the faint hum of the imperial capital's distant engines. Elena Vasquez sat at a sleek, glass-topped table, her hands clasped tightly before her. The weight of the last few days bore down on her, and she felt its presence in every muscle, every breath. Across from her, Commander Darius Kane stood by the window, his silhouette framed against the sprawling cityscape. They're not convinced, Darius said, his voice a low rumble. He didn't turn around, his gaze fixed on the Empire's grandiose skyline. We gave them everything, laid bare centuries of pain and growth, and they still look at us like we're rabid animals. Elena leaned back in her chair, exhaling slowly. It's not about convincing them entirely, she said. It's about planting doubt. If even a fraction of them question the wisdom of going to war, that could be enough. Darius finally turned to face her, his dark eyes shadowed with concern. Doubt won't stop an armada, Elena. They've already mobilized half their fleets. We saw them in orbit on the way here. If the Emperor decides we're a threat, there won't be time to negotiate further. She met his gaze, her expression unwavering. That's why we came prepared. Before Darius could respond, the door slid open with a soft hiss, revealing Lieutenant Colin, the delegation's intelligence officer. He was a wiry man with sharp features, his uniform pristine despite the stress of the mission. Ambassador, Commander, he said, nodding to each of them. I've received new intel. It's not promising. Go on, Elena said, motioning for him to continue. Colin stepped into the room, a data pad in hand. Our operatives intercepted communications from the Imperial High Command. It seems General Theris is pushing for immediate action. He's convinced the Council that humanity's refusal to submit is a direct challenge to the Empire's authority. Darius cursed under his breath, his hands balling into fists. Theris won't stop until he's spilling blood. Elena frowned, her mind racing. And the Emperor? Colin hesitated. He's more cautious, but the pressure is mounting. He can't appear weak in front of the Council. If Theris gains enough support, the Emperor may have no choice but to authorize an invasion. The room fell silent, the weight of the news pressing down on them like a storm cloud. Darius broke the silence first, his voice tight with frustration. We can't just sit here and wait for them to decide our fate. If they want proof of what humanity can do, maybe we should give them a demonstration. Elena shot him a sharp look. We're not here to provoke a fight, Darius. No, he said, his tone firm, but we are here to survive. And sometimes survival means showing your teeth. Colin cleared his throat, breaking the tension. Actually, there might be a way to do both. During our surveillance, we discovered that the Empire's primary data network runs through a central relay station on the outskirts of the capital. If we could infiltrate it and upload key files from our archives, records of humanity's greatest struggles and triumphs, they'd have no choice but to acknowledge our resilience. Elena raised an eyebrow. You're suggesting we hack the Empire's network? Colin nodded. Precisely. It's risky, but it could tip the scales in our favor. If they see the full scope of our history, not just the curated version we showed in the council chamber, it might be enough to sway them. Darius crossed his arms, considering the plan. And if we're caught? Then we'll have confirmed their worst suspicions, Elena said, her tone heavy. She looked at Colin. But it might be our best shot. What's the timeline? Colin checked his datapad. The relay station is lightly guarded, but security cycles are tight. If we're going to do this, it has to be tonight. Elena nodded, her decision made. Then we move tonight. Colin, prepare the necessary equipment. Darius, you'll lead the team. Darius arched an eyebrow. You're not coming? No, she said firmly. If something goes wrong, someone has to stay behind to continue the negotiations. Besides, this mission needs precision, not diplomacy. For a moment, Darius looked like he might argue, but he finally nodded. Understood. We'll get it done. The night on the Imperial capital was as bright as day, the city's artificial lights casting a golden glow across its sprawling surface. The relay station was an unassuming structure on the edge of the metropolis, its sleek design blending seamlessly with the surrounding architecture. Darius led a small team of operatives, their movements silent and precise as they approached the facility under the cover of darkness. Inside, the station buzzed with energy, its walls lined with glowing terminals and intricate machinery. Colin worked quickly, bypassing security protocols while Darius and the others kept watch. The tension was palpable, every sound amplified in the quiet space. Almost there, Colin whispered, his fingers flying over the terminal. Just a few more seconds. Darius nodded, his hand resting on the hilt of his sidearm. He scanned the room, his instincts honed from years of combat. Something didn't feel right, but he couldn't pinpoint what. Suddenly, the faint hum of the station was interrupted by the distant sound of boots on metal. Darius tensed, motioning for the team to take defensive positions. We've got company, he murmured. Colin cursed under his breath. I just need a little more time. The footsteps grew louder, and moments later, a squad of Imperial guards entered the room, their weapons raised. The leader, a tall figure in sleek armor, stepped forward, his helmeted gaze fixed on Darius. Step away from the terminal, he commanded, his voice cold and authoritative. Darius didn't flinch. We're not here to fight, he said, his tone calm but firm. We're here to deliver a message. The guard tilted his head, clearly unconvinced. And what message is that? Colin hit a final key on the terminal, and the room was suddenly filled with a cascade of holographic images. Scenes of Earth's history, humanity's greatest achievements, and the devastating consequences of its wars. The guards hesitated, their weapons lowering slightly as they took in the images. This, Darius said, his voice steady, is who we are. A species that has endured the unthinkable and emerged stronger. You can call us savage, but don't mistake that for weakness. If you force war upon us, we will survive. The question is, will you? The guards exchanged uncertain glances, their resolve faltering. For a moment, it seemed as if they might stand down. But the leader raised his weapon again, his grip tightening. Enough, the guard said. You're coming with us? Darius exhaled slowly, his hand hovering near his weapon. The mission had succeeded, but the cost of their actions was about to unfold. Behind him, Colin quietly deactivated the terminal, the images fading into darkness. The room was silent once more, save for the hum of the station and the unspoken question hanging in the air. What would the Empire do now? The cold steel walls of the Imperial holding cells pressed in on Darius Kane, amplifying the tension that coiled tight in his chest. He sat on a low bench, his back straight despite the dull ache of his muscles, while the soft blue glow of the energy barrier kept him confined. Across the cell, Lieutenant Colin paced in restless circles, muttering curses under his breath. This wasn't supposed to happen, Colin hissed, pausing only to glance at Darius. We were careful. There shouldn't have been a patrol. There's always a patrol, Darius replied evenly, his gaze fixed on the featureless wall ahead. His voice was calm, but there was an edge to it, a simmering frustration held tightly in check. The Empire thrives on control. They don't leave anything to chance. Colin scoffed, running a hand through his short-cropped hair. So what now? We wait for them to drag us in front of the council and parade us as proof that humanity can't be trusted. Darius finally turned to face him, his expression hard. "No," he said firmly. "We wait for an opportunity. There's always one if you know where to look." Colin started to reply, but the sound of approaching footsteps cut him off. The energy barrier flickered, and two Imperial guards stepped into the room, their weapons held at the ready. Behind them, an unfamiliar figure emerged, their presence commanding. They were tall, clad in sleek silver armor that gleamed in the dim light, and their features were sharp and angular, betraying a species unfamiliar to either man. "I am Captain Yarrell," the figure said, their voice smooth but edged with authority. "You will follow me. Any resistance will be met with force." Darius and Colin exchanged a brief glance before rising to their feet. They knew better than to resist, at least not yet. The guards formed a tight formation around them as they were escorted out of the cell block and into the labyrinthine corridors of the Imperial fortress. The halls were silent save for the rhythmic clink of boots on metal, and every turn seemed to take them deeper into the heart of the Empire's power. They were led to a vast chamber dominated by a central dais. Above it, a massive holographic display pulsed with data streams, the shifting light casting eerie patterns across the faces of the assembled Imperial officers. At the head of the room stood General Theris, his imposing frame rigid with barely concealed disdain. "You've caused quite a stir," Theris said, his voice like a blade scraping against stone. His scaled face twisted into a sneer as he stepped closer. "Breaking into one of our most secure facilities, defiling our network with your primitive records. I hope you understand the gravity of your actions." Darius met Theris's gaze without flinching. "We understand perfectly," he said. "The question is, do you?" The room bristled with tension, the Imperial officers exchanging glances, their expressions a mix of curiosity and outrage. Theris narrowed his eyes, his claws tapping rhythmically against his armored thigh. "You dare lecture us after being caught red-handed? Your arrogance is astounding." "It's not arrogance," Darius shot back. "It's survival. You see us as a threat because we refuse to submit, but we're not the ones amassing fleets and demanding obedience. Everything we've shown you, every war, every scar, was meant to prove one thing. We know the cost of conflict, and we will do everything in our power to avoid it. Can you say the same?" The general's sneer deepened, but before he could respond, a new voice cut through the room. "Enough, Theris." The Emperor's arrival was announced by the low hum of the chamber's doors opening. He entered with deliberate grace, his golden robes flowing behind him like liquid light. The room fell silent as he ascended the dais, his gaze sweeping over the assembled officers before settling on Darius and Colin. "You've made quite the impression," the Emperor said, his tone unreadable. Not all of it favorable. Darius straightened, meeting the Emperor's gaze with steady defiance. "We didn't come here to win your favor. We came here to prevent a war. And yet, your actions suggest otherwise," the Emperor replied. "Breaking into our facilities, undermining our sovereignty. These are not the actions of a peaceful delegation." "We did what we had to," Colin interjected, his voice firm despite the weight of the moment. "Your council was dismissive of our message. They refused to see the full picture. We gave you no choice but to look." The Emperor's expression remained inscrutable as he regarded them in silence. Finally, he turned to one of his advisors, a serpentine being draped in shimmering blue silks. "Play the records." A wave of murmurs rippled through the room as the holographic display flickered to life, projecting the same images Darius and Colin had uploaded. Scenes of humanity's triumphs and tragedies filled the chamber. The moon landing, the fall of the Berlin Wall, the devastation of Hiroshima, the unity of global aid efforts after natural disasters. The officers watched in silence, their expressions a mix of fascination and unease. When the projection ended, the room remained still, the weight of the images lingering like an unspoken question. The Emperor turned back to Darius and Colin, his gaze piercing. "You've shown us much," he said, "but I wonder, was this display meant to inspire respect or fear?" "Neither," Darius replied. "It was meant to show you the truth. We're not perfect, but we've endured more than most species could imagine. If you force war upon us, we will fight, but not because we want to. We'll fight because we must, and we will survive, no matter the cost. The emperor studied him for a long moment, his expression unreadable. Finally, he nodded, a slow, deliberate motion. You are dismissed. Return to your quarters and await my decision. The guards moved to escort them out, but before they left, the emperor spoke again, his voice softer but no less commanding. Know this. The fate of your species hangs by a thread. Pray that it does not snap. As they were led back through the fortress, Darius felt the weight of the emperor's words settling over him like a shroud. They had delivered their message, but the outcome was far from certain. The empire was vast, its power unmatched, and its leaders divided. Whether humanity's history would save them or doom them remained to be seen. Back in their quarters, Elena was waiting, her expression tight with worry. Well, she asked as they entered. Darius sank into a chair, his shoulders heavy with exhaustion. We made our case, he said. Now we wait. The room fell silent, the distant hum of the city outside their only companion. In the stillness, the weight of the impending decision loomed large, casting a shadow over them all. The hours stretched endlessly as the human delegation waited in their quarters, the oppressive silence broken only by the faint buzz of the Empire's comm systems. Elena sat by the comm terminal, her fingers drumming a restless rhythm on the metal surface. Darius stood by the viewport, staring out at the sprawling city that shimmered with the cold light of countless stars. Despite the stillness, tension crackled in the air, a storm waiting to break. They're taking too long, Colin said, pacing for what felt like the 100th time. His voice was tight with frustration, his usual composure fraying. The longer they deliberate, the more likely Theris is swaying them. Elena looked up, her eyes dark with exhaustion, but still sharp. We don't know that. The Emperor saw what we wanted him to see. He's not a fool. He'll weigh the consequences. Consequences? Colin barked out a bitter laugh. The Empire doesn't fear consequences. They've crushed entire civilizations for less than what we've done. Darius turned from the window, his expression hard. Enough, he said, his voice cutting through the room. Speculation isn't going to help us. If they're going to make a move, it'll be soon. As if on cue, the comm terminal chimed a sharp sound that made them all jump. Elena leaned forward, tapping the console. The screen flickered to life, revealing the face of Captain Yarrell, her expression as unreadable as ever. You're to report to the council chamber immediately, Yarrell said. The Emperor has reached a decision. Elena glanced at Darius, her stomach nodding. We're on our way. The walk to the council chamber felt longer than before, the silence of their escort heavy with unspoken tension. The vast halls of the Imperial fortress seemed to close in around them, the weight of the moment pressing down like a physical force. When they finally entered the chamber, it was alive with murmurs, the counselors' voices hushed but urgent. At the center of the room, the Emperor stood, his golden robes catching the light as he raised a hand for silence. The murmur of voices ceased instantly, the air thick with anticipation. He turned his gaze to the human delegation, his expression calm but grave. Your actions have sparked great debate within this council, the Emperor began, his voice resonating through the chamber. Some see your defiance as an act of aggression, a challenge to the Empire's authority. Others view it as a desperate plea for understanding. I have considered both perspectives carefully. Elena held her breath, her hands clenched at her sides. Every instinct urged her to speak, to plead humanity's case one last time, but she forced herself to remain silent. This was no longer her moment. It belonged to the Emperor. Humanity's history is both inspiring and troubling, the Emperor continued. Your resilience is unparalleled, your capacity for growth extraordinary. And yet, your past is marked by cycles of violence and destruction that cannot be ignored. To bring your species into the fold of the Empire carries great risk. But to wage war against you would be to risk awakening the very traits that make you so dangerous. He paused, his gaze sweeping over the counselors. War is not the answer. Not yet. Humanity will be given a chance to prove its intentions. You will be granted provisional status as allies of the Empire, subject to strict oversight. Any deviation from this agreement will be met with immediate and decisive action. The room erupted into a cacophony of voices, some shouting in protest, others murmuring in cautious approval. Elena felt a surge of relief, tempered by the gravity of the Emperor's words. This was not a victory, it was a reprieve. Theris stepped forward, his eyes blazing with fury. This is a mistake, Your Majesty. They've already shown they cannot be trusted. Giving them any measure of leniency only invites disaster. The Emperor fixed Theris with a steely gaze. Your concerns are noted, General, but the decision has been made. Humanity will not be crushed under the weight of our fear. They will be given a chance to rise above their past. Theris's jaw tightened, his claws flexing at his sides, but he said nothing further. The Emperor turned back to the delegation. Your people will be informed of this arrangement immediately. As representatives of humanity, it is your duty to ensure that this fragile peace endures. Do not squander this opportunity. Elena stepped forward, her voice steady despite the storm of emotions within her. Thank you, Your Majesty. We won't let you down. The Emperor inclined his head slightly, his expression inscrutable. Time will tell, Ambassador. Time will tell. The delegation returned to their quarters, the weight of the Emperor's decision settling over them like a heavy cloak. Collins sank into a chair, his face etched with exhaustion and disbelief. We did it, he said, his voice quiet. We actually did it? No, Darius said, his tone firm. We bought ourselves time. That's all. Theris won't stop pushing for war, and the Council is still divided. One misstep, and this fragile peace will shatter. Elena nodded, her gaze distant as she considered the road ahead. He's right. This isn't the end. It's the beginning. We need to make sure humanity understands what's at stake. The Emperor's trust is conditional, and the Empire will be watching our every move. Darius crossed his arms, his expression grim. Then we make sure they see what we want them to see. Strength, unity, and the will to survive. For a moment, the room was silent, each of them lost in their thoughts. The enormity of the task before them loomed large, but so did the opportunity. They had been given a chance, a fragile, tenuous chance, to shape the future of their species. Elena rose from her seat, her expression resolute. We came here to prevent a war, and we succeeded. Now we fight for peace. Not with weapons, but with every word, every action, every step forward. This isn't just about survival anymore. It's about proving who we are. Darius nodded, a flicker of determination in his eyes. Then we'd better make it count. Outside the viewport, the Imperial City stretched endlessly into the horizon, its lights a testament to the vastness of the Empire. Somewhere within that expanse, decisions were being made, alliances forged, and threats whispered. The delegation stood on the precipice of an uncertain future, but they stood together. And for the first time in what felt like an eternity, hope flickered on the horizon.